The story begins with a young woman stigmatized by society as the unfashionable lady, a title that burdens her existence as she prepares to depart for a life on the frontier. Her destination is a remote settlement, a stark contrast to the noble courts, yet she extends an invitation for companionship, seeking liberation from the suffocating weight of ancient traditions. This prelude transitions into the painful history of Agnes Eventail, a woman besieged by the expectations of her lineage. Within the opulent yet stifling confines of the Eventail estate, Agnes endures a barrage of verbal abuse from her father, who declares her completely useless for failing to secure a suitor. He roars that she continues to tarnish the prestigious name of the House of Eventail, his fury stemming from her inability to win over the heart of even a lower-ranking earl's son. Agnes, trembling and submissive, offers a profound apology to her enraged patriarch, acknowledging the engagement party at Earl Luger's house, initiated by her own family's proposal, ended in disaster. She recalls the humiliation of attending that gathering in a dress from a century ago, a garment that prompted her intended match, Yurata, to loudly proclaim his engagement to another woman after avoiding Agnes for the entire evening. The cruel laughter of the aristocracy echoes in her memory as they ridicule the unfashionable lady, a predictable outcome that even the observers anticipated. Her mother joins the tirade, expressing disbelief that Agnes cannot manage a single engagement, labeling her a failure as a daughter and admitting shame at having her as a sister. The Eventail parents refuse to accept the reality that a political marriage is impossible given Agnes's archaic appearance, dismissing logical reasoning as inapplicable to their prestigious bloodline. Agnes internalizes their frustration, acknowledging that the onlookers are correct to mock her. She reflects on the downfall of her house, noting that they were reduced to mere local lords due to her grandfather's arrogance regarding his ancestors' achievements. Despite this decline, her family clings to the title of the prestigious Marquis Eventail, a relic from the time her great-grandfather served as the Prime Minister's right-hand man. Now, society recognizes them as a fossil aristocracy, a family obsessed with moldy values and proud only of their bloodline, having completely abandoned modern ways of life. Flashbacks reveal a childhood marred by this obsession. Agnes was forced from an early age to don the styles of old fashion, creating a deep rift between her and her peers. Her parents educated her to reject everything currently in vogue, forcing her into heavy makeup and antique dresses that made her resemble an old painting or a monster. When she attempted to point out the practicality of modern fashion, her father silenced her, insisting that modern materials were cheap and flimsy while demanding she stand tall and ignore the lowly aristocrats, who could not grasp the value of antiques. Although she eventually found herself disparaging tradition and rebelling against it internally, her daily appeals to change the status quo only resulted in her becoming a disgrace to the family. In the present, the cycle of abuse continues as her father nearly strikes her, causing her to cower in fear while he berates her for not listening. Her mother intervenes only to deliver a new command. Agnes must attend the engagement party held at the royal palace for Princess Mia and Nazelbert. This time, she is ordered to pursue the son of Viscount Brie, a target chosen solely because his low-ranking family possesses significant wealth. Agnes protests, arguing that such a pursuit is disrespectful and noting that the Viscount's son is the type to commit adultery once his status rises. But her mother silences her, reiterating that the family can no longer be careless. The mandate is absolute. Agnes must dress traditionally and without shame, as her mother's honor is also at stake. Resigned to her fate, Agnes retreats to her carriage, lamenting that she wants to stay behind and fearing the inevitable hurt and rejection that awaits her. She slumps into the seat, noting the tattered state of the cushion, and decides to repair it using her magic. Agnes possesses a rare ability known as material enchantment, but she dismisses it as plain and useful only for reinforcing objects. As she repairs the cushion, she muses that if she possessed the legendary holy magic or nature-controlling abilities valued by society, her engagement prospects might be different. Exhausted by the constant ridicule, she contemplates fleeing to a convent in the country where unmarried noblewomen serve, viewing it as a revelation and a path to a respectable life without marriage. However, for now, she resolves to do what she can regarding the Viscount Brie. A few days later, Agnes arrives at the palace of the Desnam nation. She scans the crowd for Viscount Brie's son but is immediately besieged by the whispers and stares of the other guests. The attendees openly mock her outdated appearance, questioning how she can walk around looking like that and stating they would die of shame if they were her. Desperate to finish her business and leave, Agnes rushes through the hall but stumbles, colliding with a gentleman and spilling wine on his suit. Terrified, she apologizes profusely, expecting harsh retaliation. The gentleman, however, reacts with unexpected grace. He catches her and asks if she is hurt, ignoring the wine stain on his own clothes. Agnes, fearing her mother's wrath for damaging the dress, is paralyzed with anxiety, but the man gently examines her garment, noting that it will tear if handled roughly. He creates a moment of calm amidst the hostility, asking if her dingy dress looks somewhat better now, implying a subtle use of magic or kindness to restore her dignity. Agnes is bewildered by his kindness, questioning why the star of the show would speak to an unfashionable lady like her. The crowd murmurs in confusion as they recognize the man as Nazelbert Floriscruz, the fiancé of Princess Mia. Nazelbert advises Agnes not to get involved with him for her own sake, but she remains struck by his gentle demeanor. The atmosphere shifts abruptly with the arrival of Princess Mia, who enters the hall clinging to the arm of another man. Nazelbert confronts the princess, asking the meaning of this display. Princess Mia, displaying a cruel exuberance, publicly announces that she is breaking off her engagement to Nazelbert and is now engaged to her companion, Robin. The crowd gasps in shock. Nazelbert attempts to reason with her, questioning if she intends to abandon her royal duties and stating that His Majesty would never sanction such a sudden decision. Princess Mia counters with venomous accusations, claiming she knows everything about Nazelbert's alleged jealousy toward Robin. She introduces Robin as the most gifted magician in the country, a rare user of sacred magic with valuable blood and high magic power. Mia accuses Nazelbert of pushing Robin down the stairs and ripping his clothes to shreds out of envy. Nazelbert vehemently denies the allegations, asserting his innocence and refusing to accept a one-sided condemnation without proof. He suggests taking the matter to a proper setting to re-examine the evidence, but Mia repeatedly screams at him to shut up, declaring that his seriousness is the part of him she has always hated. Escalating the confrontation, Princess Mia reveals she is already pregnant with Robin's child, referring to the fetus as the future king's father, and asserts that the uneducated Nazelbert is unfit to replace him. She commands the guards to seize Nazelbert, and they restrain him on the floor. Even while pinned to the ground, Nazelbert's concern remains with Agnes, and he asks the terrified woman if she is all right. Mia's attention snaps to Agnes, and she demands to know who this person is. She mocks Agnes's out-of-style dress and overdone makeup, recognizing her as the infamous Agnes Eventail everyone talks about. Nazelbert attempts to defend Agnes, shouting that she has nothing to do with the situation. Ignoring him, Princess Mia decides to deliver her final judgment. Laughing maniacally, she declares Nazelbert's punishment to be banishment to the frontier. To add a layer of humiliating irony to the sentence, she decrees that he must also marry the unfashionable lady, Agnes. The chapter concludes with Agnes standing in shock as the decree binds her fate to the exiled nobleman. Violent torrent of verbal abuse cascades down upon Agnes Eventail, her father's face contorted into a grotesque mask of fury as he berates her for the disastrous turn her engagement has taken. Veins bulge from his temples while he screams that she is an absolute imbecile, his spittle flying with the force of his rage. He reminds her with aggressive gestures that her instructions were to pursue the son of Viscount Brie, a match he deemed suitable for their family's ambition. Instead of securing that advantageous alliance, she now stands before him, condemned to a union with a man branded a criminal, a twist of fate that the patriarch finds utterly disgraceful. Agnes attempts to interject, raising a trembling hand to plead for a moment to explain, but her soft voice is drowned out by the sheer volume of his indignation. The narrative shifts to the context of this calamity, revealing the gentle face of Nazelbert, the man at the center of the scandal. He was the fiancé of Princess Mia, yet he had shown kindness to Agnes in the past. Now, however, that kindness has been overshadowed by false accusations that have labeled him a criminal, a confusing turn of events that even Agnes struggles to comprehend. The memory of the royal palace plays out vividly in her mind, where Princess Mia, with a cruel and triumphant expression, declared Nazelbert's banishment to the frontier. In the same breath, the princess maliciously decreed his marriage to Agnes, referring to her with the derogatory title of that unfashionable lady, effectively sealing both their fates in a public spectacle of humiliation. Agnes stood there, completely dumbfounded by the sudden and chaotic unraveling of her social standing. Back in the present confrontation, her father continues his tirade, his fist clenched as he declares the social ramifications of this arrangement. He bellows that since she has been publicly ordered to marry a criminal, no other respectable family would ever consider taking her as a wife. Viewing her as a damaged asset that can no longer serve his purposes, he makes a ruthless decision. With a sweeping gesture of finality, he pronounces her disowned from the Eventail family, ordering her to be gone from his house immediately. Agnes stares blankly, her heavy makeup masking the shock as the reality of her expulsion sinks in, leaving her with nothing but a confused utterance as the doors likely slam shut on her former life. The scene transitions to the cold, unforgiving streets of the royal capital at night, where Agnes wanders alone, the darkness mirroring her bleak prospects. She realizes the gravity of her predicament. She has been kicked out with absolutely no resources, possessing no friends, acquaintances, or a safe place to seek refuge. The freezing air bites at her exposed skin, and she hugs her arms to her chest in a futile attempt to preserve warmth. Resigning herself to the situation, she decides she must wait until the sun rises to find someone who might offer assistance, noting the eerie emptiness of the capital streets at night. As she walks, her thoughts drift back to Nazelbert, recalling how pitiful he looked during the confrontation at the palace, a memory that evokes a painful empathy within her. The physical toll of her attire begins to weigh heavily on her. Her legs scream in protest under the immense weight of her elaborate, tacky dress, and she feels her endurance crumbling. Apathy begins to set in as she whispers that she simply does not care anymore, her body reaching its limit. She stumbles, her foot catching as the exhausting trek proves too much, and she collapses with a sharp cry of pain. Sitting on the cobblestones, she wonders vaguely how she ended up in a situation that feels as destitute as becoming a nun, sighing deeply into the night air. Just as she questions what course of action remains open to her, a voice pierces the silence, calling out, "Miss Agnes." She turns, startled, to see Nazelbert emerging from the shadows, breathless and clearly frantic. He confirms her identity and explains that he heard the news of her disownment and expulsion from her family home. Relief washes over his features as he tells her how desperately he had been searching for her, expressing a profound sense of responsibility for her plight. He feels a compelling need to apologize for dragging her into his misfortune, his posture conveying genuine remorse. Agnes attempts to deflect his apology, but Nazelbert insists on explaining the truth behind the scandal. He reveals that the core issue lies with Princess Mia, who has become pregnant with another man's child despite her engagement to him. He blames his own incompetence for the situation, lamenting that Agnes, an innocent bystander with no connection to these royal intrigues, has been swept up in the collateral damage. He admits that fear of Princess Mia silenced him, though he suspects everyone in the court silently acknowledged the truth of the affair. Nazelbert looks at her with concern, acknowledging that she lost her home solely because of the order to marry him, and tentatively asks if she holds any resentment toward him. Agnes pauses, searching for the right words, before assuring him that she harbors no grudges against him for the events that transpired. Instead, she offers her own apology, expressing regret that he was forced to marry a woman widely ridiculed as the unfashionable lady. She emphasizes that his burden is far greater, having to bear baseless accusations of criminality on top of the personal betrayal. Nazelbert dismisses her self-deprecation, but then pauses, referencing the rumors that surround her. He mentions the term potato, referring to the derogatory nickname Potato Lady, often used to describe her unstylish appearance. He muses on why she was so kind when they first met, suggesting that her inherent nature explains why she seemed so carefree even amidst the tension at the palace. Agnes smiles sadly, remarking that it is cruel to judge individuals solely based on their outward appearance, a philosophy that likely contributed to her social ostracization and her unfortunate nickname. Nazelbert, resolving to take action, invites her to accompany him, signaling that they should leave the streets. Agnes hesitates, flushing with embarrassment as she protests that she cannot possibly impose on a duke's household, especially now that she has been stripped of her status by the Marquis family. Nazelbert gently overrides her objections, insisting that the fault lies with him and that it is unacceptable for a lady to be left wandering outside at such an hour. He declares his intention to take her to his estate. Attempting to maintain her dignity, Agnes claims she is fine and can walk, but the moment she puts weight on her foot, a sharp pain shoots through her leg, causing her to wince visibly. Nazelbert notices her distress immediately. Without asking for further permission, he steps in close and scoops her up into his arms. Agnes flusters, stammering at the sudden intimacy, but Nazelbert calmly assures her that the carriage is nearby and asks her to endure the embarrassment for just a short while. He notes that she seems to have injured her foot significantly. Settled into the carriage, Nazelbert examines her foot and discovers a severe blister, remarking on how painful it must be. He apologizes for the liberty but asks to see the shoes that caused such damage. Agnes reveals that the shoes are actually her grandmother's, explaining that her parents, obsessed with tradition and control, never allowed her to have shoes of her own. She was left with no choice but to wear the ill-fitting heirlooms, which are too small for her feet, highlighting the neglect she suffered even before her disownment. Upon arriving at the estate, Nazelbert instructs the staff to retrieve the shoes later and carries Agnes out of the carriage, stating it would be indecent for her to enter the Duke's home barefoot. Agnes, overwhelmed by the grandeur of the mansion and the situation, worries about meeting anyone inside, but Nazelbert reassures her that she need not worry, as he intends to leave the home soon regardless. He carries her up the grand staircase, his demeanor protective and resolute. Inside a lavish room, Nazelbert attends to her injury personally, dismissing her claims that it will heal on its own and insisting on proper care. He gently chastises her, advising that she needs to take better care of herself. Agnes, touched by his solicitude, thanks him profoundly for helping her when she had nowhere else to turn. Nazelbert, seemingly burdened by guilt, replies that he will do whatever he can to aid her, reiterating that her homelessness is a direct result of his circumstances. He observes her concern for him and calls her a truly kind person for worrying about his feelings when she is the one who has suffered the greater immediate loss. Nazelbert expresses a quiet hope that the king will eventually intervene and rectify the situation, assuming that Princess Mia will soon realize her mistake. Agnes, however, looks at him with a mixture of sadness and admiration. Nazelbert confesses that his upbringing was strictly controlled, designed to mold him into a perfect royal consort to support the country, which made him act like a puppet and perhaps neglect the personal aspect of his engagement. He blames this neglect for the current outcome. Agnes interrupts his self-blame, struggling to find the right words but ultimately declaring that his earnest dedication backfired unjustly. She asserts that a proper investigation would prove his innocence without a doubt and praises him as admirable, urging that his efforts for the country should be recognized rather than punished. Touched by her fierce defense, Nazelbert smiles warmly, though he admits the situation with the child makes things complicated. He pulls playfully at one of her oversized, ridiculous hair drills, trying to lighten the mood, and tells her to cheer up. He confesses he lacks the perfect words but tells her sincerely that she is a wonderful person. Agnes beams, her spirits lifted, and tells him, "You're welcome," in a cheerful, sing-song manner. Nazelbert admits he feels as though a great weight has been lifted from his shoulders and thanks her again. He then directs her attention to the practicalities of the night, suggesting she rest well, and introduces her to someone he trusts. He leads her to the guest room on the second floor. A maid with a sharp, competent look appears. Nazelbert introduces her as Kelly and assures Agnes she is trustworthy. Agnes bows politely, introducing herself, though she stumbles slightly in her heavy dress. Nazelbert bids them good night, leaving Agnes in Kelly's care. Agnes and Kelly exchange greetings, with Agnes flustered by the maid's cool and professional demeanor. Kelly shows her to the room, telling her to use her first name freely. Agnes enters the guest room and is immediately awestruck by its beauty and luxury, exclaiming in delight. Kelly, efficient and focused, directs her to the bathroom where hot water has already been prepared. Agnes enters the bath, feeling the oppressive weight of her family's suffocating atmosphere wash away with the dirt and sweat. She revels in the liberating sensation of the warm water and the freedom it represents. Kelly enters the bathroom to assist, and upon seeing Agnes's face, declares that she will remove the makeup. Agnes tries to dismiss it as nothing, but Kelly proceeds, scrubbing away the layers of unfashionable cosmetics. The night passes, and Agnes reflects on the whirlwind of events, realizing that while she always planned to leave home, she never imagined it happening like this. She acknowledges that she cannot rely on others forever but is grateful for the sanctuary she has found for now. The next morning, sunlight streams into the room as Kelly wakes Agnes, asking if she slept well. Agnes confirms she did, thanks to Kelly's care. She notices Kelly holding a tray of items and asks about them. Kelly admits with a rare show of excitement that she has been wanting to try her hand at a makeover, revealing she rush-ordered specific items just for Agnes. She points out that Agnes hasn't finished her makeup yet. Agnes looks at the cosmetics and is amazed by their quality, noting they are light as a feather and beautifully bright. Kelly begins to work her magic, applying the makeup with a skilled hand. She selects a pinkish-brown shade for the lips and applies a proper amount of white powder to the eyelids to blend naturally with Agnes's skin tone, avoiding the crimson, heavy-handed look Agnes was forced to wear previously. Kelly aims for a soft finish, ensuring the cheeks aren't too red, meticulously crafting a look that highlights Agnes's natural beauty rather than hiding it. The process concludes with Kelly stepping back, satisfied with her work. Agnes Eventail stands frozen before the mirror, her fingers trembling as they graze her own reflection. The image staring back at her is so radically different from her usual visage that she stammers, questioning if the vision is merely a dream. Kelly, the maid responsible for this metamorphosis, assures her without hesitation that the woman in the glass is, without a doubt, Miss Agnes herself. For years, Agnes had been plastered with a mask of snow-white foundation and garish red lips, forced into dresses that made her resemble a walking, antiquated painting. Kelly explains that she simply utilized her skills to unveil the natural beauty that Agnes possessed all along. Agnes marvels at the transformation, her eyes widening as she catalogues the changes. Makeup that accentuates rather than masks, hair that falls in soft, elegant waves rather than rigid drills, and a light, lovely dress that allows her to breathe. Most importantly, she wiggles her toes in comfortable shoes, a sensation of relief washing over her. Kelly, eager to display her masterpiece, urges Agnes to hurry and show her new appearance to Nazelbert, asserting that this modern style is what she has always idolized. In the estate's sunlit parlor, Nazelbert sits calmly sipping his tea, unaware of the revelation approaching him. Kelly whispers encouragement to a nervous Agnes, telling her to have more confidence. As they enter, Nazelbert chokes, the teacup rattling in his hand as his composure shatters completely upon seeing her. He stares, stunned into silence, before managing a simple, breathless compliment. Regaining his bearings, Nazelbert greets her, his cheeks tinged with a flush as he asks how she feels. Agnes beams, a radiant smile replacing her usual anxious expression, and Nazelbert notes with genuine warmth that her mood seems to have brightened significantly since the previous day. He affirms that the new dress and hairstyles suit her perfectly. The maids surrounding them gossip excitedly, praising the transformation, though Agnes humbly insists she did nothing special and credits Kelly entirely. Nazelbert reveals the source of Kelly's expertise, explaining that she was formerly the lead wardrobe assistant to the princess. He recounts witnessing her dismissal, a casualty of Princess Mia's selfish whims, and his subsequent decision to hire her to prevent her from being stranded without employment. He praises Kelly's exceptional taste, acknowledging that he saved a valuable talent from ruin. The conversation shifts to a heavier topic as Nazelbert addresses their precarious situation. He predicts that news of the palace incident will spread rapidly and vows to do everything in his power to ensure Agnes is not burdened by the fallout. He insists that her future is paramount and urges her to prioritize herself, expressing guilt over inconveniencing her further. Agnes vehemently protests his self-sacrificial stance. In a moment of innocent determination, Agnes declares that with her new comfortable shoes, she could walk to the ends of the earth, suggesting she can manage on her own. Nazelbert sharply refuses, his protective instinct flaring as he declares he will not allow it. Misunderstanding his objection, Agnes assumes the clothes are too expensive and awkwardly asks if she can keep them, causing Nazelbert to apologize for his intensity. He clarifies his true intention. He is actively working to have the Marquis of Eventail lift her disownment, determined to restore her to her former life. Agnes thanks him, though her expression holds a complex mix of gratitude and hesitation. Later, in the privacy of the corridor, Kelly intercepts Nazelbert with a grave report regarding Agnes's physical condition. She reveals that beneath the makeup and clothing, Agnes bears significant injuries. Kelly describes marks on Agnes's arms consistent with being whipped multiple times and traces of bruising on her face that had been concealed by the thick foundation. Furthermore, Kelly explains that Agnes's skin is discolored from repeated blistering and her toes are physically deformed, a result of being forced to wear tight, ill-fitting shoes and corsets for years. Kelly warns that if Agnes continues to live as she has, the damage will become irreparable. Nazelbert listens in horrified silence, realizing that her request for the shoes that morning stemmed from deep-seated physical trauma. He covers his face with his hand, acknowledging that the darkness shrouding the Eventail family is far deeper and more sinister than he had imagined. Meanwhile, Agnes discovers the estate's library, her eyes lighting up with the joy of a child finding a treasure trove. She explains that books were the only things she could choose freely at her parents' home, though she had only access to century-old relics. Nazelbert, having followed her, promises to order plenty of new books for her. Agnes excitedly pulls volumes from the shelves, asking about animal ecology, her curiosity boundless. She stumbles upon a stack of research notes regarding the utilization of magic and realizes they are Nazelbert's own writings. Reading through the dense annotations, she recognizes his genius and the sheer volume of effort he has poured into his work. Overcome with emotion at his dedication, she silently prays for him to become the happiest person in the world, lamenting that such talent might go to waste. The tranquility is shattered by a loud crash and shouting from the hallway. Agnes and Kelly rush out to find a young man storming through the house. It is Julian, Nazelbert's younger brother, who is incensed by the rumors. He rants that no one works as hard as his brother and declares it disgraceful that Nazelbert is being forced to marry the potato lady. He vows to kick her out before the marriage can occur, completely unaware that the beautiful woman standing before him is the very target of his ire. Nazelbert enters with tea, diffusing the tension, and introduces Julian to Agnes. Julian freezes, confused by the presence of this elegant lady, asking who she is. When he realizes this is the potato lady, he stammers, humiliated by his previous outburst. Agnes, rather than being offended, offers him tea with a gentle smile. Julian bows deeply, his face flushed with shame, and offers a sincere apology for his rudeness. Agnes waves off the apology, telling him not to worry. Julian observes her genuine concern for his brother's situation and realizes she is not the burden he feared she was. He admits his frustration with the capital's politics and the unfairness of his brother's suffering. Agnes agrees, clenching her fists as she validates his anger, calling the situation awful. Julian looks at her with newfound respect, acknowledging her kindness. Nazelbert then calls for a serious discussion, holding a document that has arrived from the palace. He reveals the contents. Princess Mia is pregnant with Robindano's child, a fact now known to many nobles and the king himself. However, rather than punishing the infidelity, the royal family intends to cover up the scandal by claiming the child possesses sacred power for the kingdom. Agnes realizes with disgust that they are manipulating the truth to protect the royal lineage. Nazelbert explains the ultimatum he faced. If he had agreed to accept Robin as Mia's lover and raise the child as his own, he would have become the prince consort and avoided exile. Because he refused to participate in this deception, his banishment to the frontier remains in effect. Kelly adds context, explaining that the king is prioritizing Mia's succession over the second prince, whose mother is a commoner, creating a power vacuum that Mia is unfit to fill. In the quiet aftermath of this political revelation, Nazelbert turns his attention back to Agnes. He takes her hand, his expression solemn. He admits that his initial plan to return her to the Eventail family is no longer an option, now that he understands the abuse she faces there. He explicitly references the bruise on her face, which she tries to dismiss as a common occurrence, further confirming her dangerous home environment. Agnes, feeling like a failure with nowhere to turn, suggests she could go to a convent. Nazelbert rejects this immediately, pointing out that convents are funded by the very nobility and royalty that ostracized her, meaning she would find no safety there. With all other doors closed, Nazelbert makes a definitive choice. He tells Agnes that he feels it is his duty to protect her. He warns her that life on the frontier will be difficult, far removed from the comforts of the capital. Looking into her eyes with unwavering resolve, he poses the question that will bind their fates together. Will you marry me? A gentle breeze sweeps through the open window of the carriage, rustling the hair of the newlywed couple as they travel away from the royal capital. Nazelbert, looking at his new bride with a soft expression, breaks the silence to redefine the boundaries of their relationship. He declares that they are married now, granting her the permission to bypass formal titles and address him simply as Nazel. Agnes flushes, her cheeks tinting pink, but she accepts the directive with a bright, enthusiastic nod, testing the name on her tongue. Nazelbert returns the gesture, granting her the same intimacy by calling her Agnes. The moment overwhelms her. She trembles with a mix of delight and nervousness, her internal thoughts screaming about his charm, though she swiftly corrects herself allowed to use his formal title again out of habit, before correcting herself once more. As the carriage rumbles onward, Agnes's mind drifts back to the day she accepted his proposal. The memory transitions into the reality of their current situation. Nazelbert explains the gravity of their departure. He confesses that leaving her in the capital would have been a dereliction of duty, as he could not guarantee her safety there given her current social standing and the political climate. By keeping her close, he ensures he can protect her with his own hands. Agnes listens, her hands clasped in her lap. She interprets his protectiveness through a lens of self-deprecation, believing he pities her for being an unfashionable lady. She clenches her fists, resolving that she cannot simply be a burden. She determines that while this marriage is the best choice for now, she must strive for independence so that one day, Nazelbert might be free to marry someone he truly loves, completely missing the genuine affection he already holds for her. The conversation shifts to their destination, the Sutrina territory. Nazelbert describes the land with a somber pragmatism. It sits at the southern edge of the Desnam nation, a place teeming with nature but severely ravaged by magical beasts. These creatures, possessing supernatural powers, have disrupted the ecosystem. Nazelbert notes that despite the lush environment, crop yields remain puzzlingly sparse. He intends to investigate the soil and the environment thoroughly to uncover the root cause of this infertility. Agnes listens intently, processing the harsh reality of her new home. Nazelbert then gestures to a wooden crate resting on the seat, revealing his plan to combat the famine. He explains his own magical affinity, plant manipulation. His power allows him to accelerate growth and alter plant properties according to his will. He envisions using this ability to cultivate the remote frontier, securing a stable food supply where traditional farming has failed. He opens the crate to reveal seedlings he has already nurtured with his magic. Agnes recognizes the plants from his study in the capital, realizing that his research had always been directed toward this noble goal. She gazes at him, her admiration deepening, seeing a man not just of status, but of purpose. Turning the focus to her, Nazelbert inquires about Agnes's own magical capabilities. Agnes shrinks slightly, her posture conveying embarrassment. She admits her magic is rare but considers it modest and utilitarian, material enhancement. She explains that she can only reinforce the durability of clothes and belongings. She expects dismissal, but Nazelbert's eyes light up. He asserts that such magic holds immense potential, rejecting her self-belittlement. Agnes trembles again, touched by his validation, while Nazelbert looks out the window, seemingly genuinely impressed, leaving Agnes to wonder if he is simply being kind or if he truly sees value in her small talent. Meanwhile, in the Sutrina territory, the atmosphere is far less optimistic. Inside a cluttered office, an administrative aide named Connie Fawn leans back, venting his frustrations to the ceiling. He complains about the central government treating the frontier as a dumping ground for unwanted personnel. He recounts the rumors. They sent a criminal duke and a woman known as the Potato Lady. However, Connie's grievances are specific. He has heard rumors that the Potato Lady is actually a visual terror, a woman with a pure white face, bright blue eyelids, and stark red cheeks, a makeup monster who will only add to the region's beast infestation. He laments his lot in life, tasked with picking up these unwanted arrivals. Resigned to his fate, he heads to the stables, muttering about the depressing nature of his job. Connie enters the stable, where the animals are kept. He checks on the mounts, hoping the new lord won't cause chaos like the previous one. He recalls the name, Nazelbert, the second son of Duke Floriscruz. Connie adjusts his gloves, a mischievous and somewhat malicious idea forming in his mind. He decides that cowards will only get in the way in the harsh frontier. He resolves to test the newcomers immediately upon their arrival, planning to use the local wildlife to scare them and assert the dominance of the frontier lifestyle over the pampered city folk. Days later, the carriage arrives at the city of Roca, the layover point before the final leg of the journey. Agnes steps out and stretches her arms high above her head, invigorated rather than exhausted. She declares she is completely fine, surprising her maid who expects fatigue. Nazelbert steps down and observes her energy with a smile. He informs her that they will switch to rideable beasts for the remainder of the trip. Agnes's eyes sparkle with excitement. She professes her absolute love for animals. When Nazelbert mentions rideable beasts, Agnes innocently asks if he means a Pegasus, picturing a majestic winged horse. Nazelbert chuckles, noting that she is knowledgeable, though he doesn't correct her assumption immediately. Connie approaches the couple in the town square. He scans the area, looking for the grotesque, painted lady from the rumors. He sees Nazelbert and a normal, unassuming young woman with messy but charming hair. He introduces himself as Connie Fawn, the administrative aide. He confirms Nazelbert's identity but then looks around in confusion, bluntly asking where the wife is. Nazelbert, confused, gestures to Agnes standing right next to him. Connie's brain short-circuits. He stares at Agnes, who smiles awkwardly. His internal monologue screams in disbelief. She is not a monster, nor is she a stunning beauty. She is simply normal. Agnes apologizes for not meeting whatever expectation he had, though she doesn't know what it was. Connie, flustered and realizing he is the source of the terrible rumors, quickly tries to recover. He clears his throat and attempts to regain his hardened frontiersman persona. He declares that pretty faces are useless in the frontier and that it is what's inside that counts. He points a thumb behind him, signaling for them to follow him to the ride stop. He privately hopes that his test will still work, intending to teach these beautiful, soft aristocrats a lesson about ruthlessness. Connie leads them to a large stable door. A massive, scaled claw slams down onto the ground, shaking the dust. Connie smirks, waiting for the screams. He throws open the doors, revealing a massive wyvern, a terrifying dragon-like creature known to be the most difficult riding beast to handle. He laughs maniacally, shouting about how the spoiled richies should behold the true terror of the frontier. However, the reaction is the opposite of what he anticipates. Nazelbert and Agnes gasp, not in fear, but in sheer awe. Their eyes sparkle with delight. Nazelbert steps forward, admiring the creature, while Agnes squeals that it is awesome. Connie freezes, his jaw dropping. Nazelbert casually thanks Connie, revealing that he researched the area in advance and was trained specifically to ride wyverns because they are faster than Pegasuses. He is thrilled to have access to one. Agnes, far from terrified, calls the scaly beast very cute. Connie stands defeated as the couple rushes toward the wyvern, chirping with excitement. The wyvern, surprisingly docile, allows them to approach. Nazelbert effortlessly mounts the beast and extends a hand to Agnes. She takes it, her face glowing with happiness. Connie, stripped of his cynical victory, can only watch as the new lord and lady prepare to depart. Agnes, caught up in the moment, briefly asks if she can ride with Connie, but quickly realizes her place is with her husband. Nazelbert pulls Agnes up onto the saddle in front of him. He secures her, his arms wrapping around her to hold the reins. The wyvern launches into the sky. As they ascend, the wind whips past them. Agnes looks back at Nazelbert, who smiles confidently. In this moment, high above the ground, Agnes reflects on her journey. She realizes that if he hadn't reached out to her that day, she would have remained the unfashionable lady, stagnant and alone. His hand extended to her sparked a profound transformation. She acknowledges her worries about the future and her own capabilities, but the accumulation of these small, kind moments with him gives her strength. As they soar through the clouds, leaving the city of Roca behind, Agnes sheds the mental weight of her old life just as she shed her heavy dresses. She looks forward, her expression hardening with determination. She vows to discover what she can do for the frontier and, more importantly, for Nazelbert, the man who changed her world. The narrative lens shifts to a frenetic side story, focusing on a pivotal moment in the past involving the Earl's son, Yurata Luger. In a scene dominated by high-contrast shadows and jagged speech bubbles, Yurata appears in a state of sheer panic, sweat clinging to his face as he glances over his shoulder. A voice calls out to him from behind, sweet and prolonged, addressing him as Yurata-sama. This prompts Yurata to make a frantic and important decision regarding his immediate future. The caption introduces this scenario with a satirical title, "The Earl's Son Finds His True Love?" While running from an unfashionable daughter. Yurata explodes into motion, his departure emphasized by sharp action lines and sound effects indicating rapid movement. He flees with desperate speed, the voice continuing to pursue him with a sing-song persistence. He zips around corners and obstacles, the air whistling past him as he attempts to put distance between himself and his pursuer. Seeking sanctuary, Yurata dives beneath a large tablecloth, curling into a trembling ball of anxiety. Huddled in the darkness under the table, tears stream down his flushed face as he contemplates his mortality, thinking, "I'll be killed." His internal monologue turns venomous toward the political machinations that led him here. He curses the Eventail family, questioning why they would ask him to marry her. His mind conjures a terrifying image of his pursuer, a grotesque, caricature version of a woman with heavy makeup, drill curls, and a menacing aura, labeled Yurata POV. He resolutely tells himself there is no way he can marry someone like that, refusing the arrangement with every fiber of his being. However, his hiding spot is compromised. The tablecloth lifts, flooding his sanctuary with light. Yurata freezes, looking up with wide, tear-filled eyes as a figure peers in. Instead of the monster he envisioned, he sees Agnes, who looks at him with genuine concern, asking if he is all right. In that instant, Yurata's perception fractures. The background erupts into bubbles and sparkles as he gazes up at the woman before him. He does not see the unfashionable lady he feared. Instead, his mind overlays an image of perfection, and he mentally screams, "True love! Lady Harriet!" He is struck by her beauty, noting internally that she is kind and elegant, completely rewriting his previous terror. He stammers a shy, "It's okay," captivated by this sudden vision of grace. The romantic delusion is shattered by a dry, cynical voice from outside the table. A dark-haired man observes the scene with a deadpan expression, remarking that the potato lady has chased Yurata around again. The narrative poses a dramatic question about Yurata's ultimate fate. Ignoring reality, Yurata's internal narrative bids a dramatic farewell to the unfashionable lady, as he resolves to live his future with this idealized vision of her, completely dissociating from the fact that they are the same person. The scene transitions to a brightly lit room focusing on the maid, Kelly, in a segment titled, Super Kelly. Agnes, wearing a stunning, frilly dress adorned with roses, looks at her maid with sparkling, awe-filled eyes. She demands to know where on earth Kelly obtained such a garment, praising it as gorgeous and dazzling. Kelly, maintaining a stoic and professional demeanor, reveals that she tailored it herself. Agnes lets out a small sound of confusion. Kelly explains that she could not find a dress on the market that fit Agnes's specific image, so she took matters into her own hands. She adds, with a serene smile that radiates a terrifying level of competence, that she decided to make one and had a lot of fun doing so, completing the task in a single night. Agnes stands frozen, her hand near her mouth in shock, the text, "one night?" hovering beside her as she wonders if she misheard that impossible time frame. The focus shifts again to a character profile for Robin Levbischen. He is identified as an illegitimate child of Baron Levbischen, with a caption pointing out his nice face. Robin is depicted stretching lazily, leaning back with a look of utter boredom. A stack of books sits ignored on a desk behind him, labeled Royal Education Mountain, while he tosses an old book aside. He breaks the fourth wall or speaks to an unseen audience, dismissing his studies by admitting that studying isn't really his strong point. Instead, he proposes a different plan, to display his super pickup technique. With a confident wink and a finger pointing to his cheek, he suggests going out to find a cute girl. However, his soliloquy is interrupted by Agnes, who appears in the bottom corner with a flat, unimpressed expression. She dryly observes that he is talking to himself a lot, puncturing his cool facade as he sweats nervously. Wind rushes past Agnes and Nazelbert as they soar through the high skies, the velocity of their travel eliciting a breathless exclamation from the noblewoman as she clings tightly to her companion. Nazelbert remains focused, guiding their flight path as the destination finally breaks through the horizon. Below them, the frontier city of Sutrina reveals itself, its sprawling infrastructure marking the heart of the territory. From this vantage point, the wind whips around them, but Agnes's attention remains fixed on the ground below. The rumors she had heard previously now manifest as undeniable reality. Nazelbert directs her gaze toward the agricultural zones, where the view from the heavens exposes the utter barrenness of the fields. The land appears desolate, stripped of vitality, prompting Agnes to suspect the situation surpasses even their grim expectations. Nazelbert concurs with a solemn affirmation, acknowledging the severity of the blight plaguing the region. The flight concludes as they descend toward the earth, Agnes signaling her readiness to dismount. Nazelbert inquires if she can manage the drop, but before she can safely alight, the wyvern, Connie, shifts abruptly. The sudden movement throws Agnes off balance, and she plummets from the saddle with a startled cry. In a blur of reflex and strength, Nazelbert intercepts her fall, catching her securely in his arms before she can strike the ground. The impact of the catch leaves them entangled, Agnes breathless and heart pounding against his chest. Agnes stammers, shaken by the sudden drop and the intimacy of the rescue. Nazelbert holds her steady, his immediate concern focusing on whether she sustained any injuries during the mishap. The proximity overwhelms Agnes, her internal thoughts racing as she attempts to rationalize the embrace. She reminds herself that his actions were purely altruistic, a necessity of the moment, and tries to quell her frantic heartbeat by recalling her status as merely a temporary wife. Nearby, Connie the wyvern watches the scene, appearing to sense the disruption she caused. Nazelbert observes Agnes's distress, asking if she feels unwell, while urging caution. The moment interrupts abruptly as a man bursts onto the scene, his voice raising in disbelief. He demands to know if they actually transported guests using a wyvern, shocked by the unorthodox method of travel. He shouts for the wyvern to halt, identifying the creature as Connie, while expressing his bewilderment at their impossibly fast arrival. The man, composing himself after his initial outburst, offers an apology for his lack of decorum. He explains that he failed to secure a Pegasus in time for their transport, necessitating the improvisation. He introduces himself as Henry Burkett, the head administrator sent from the royal capital. Henry formally welcomes Nazelbert and Agnes to Sutrina, outlining the current political vacuum. The territory lacks a lord, and he serves as the temporary overseer. Despite admitting he was banished from the capital, Henry declares his fierce determination to rise and become the official lord of this land. He grimly notes that the harsh reality of life in Sutrina, specifically the crop failure they witnessed from the sky, is a challenge he intends to face. Nazelbert expresses his gratitude to Henry for the reception. Henry, noticing the fatigue on the travelers, decides to postpone official work discussions until the following day. He urges Nazelbert to prioritize rest, acknowledging the difficult position the noble finds himself in and encouraging him to take breaks whenever the opportunity arises. Nazelbert thanks him again, while Henry observes that Agnes also appears thoroughly exhausted. Henry then turns his attention back to the wyvern, Connie, admonishing the creature to rest as well as he chases after it. Night descends upon Sutrina, the silhouette of the castle towers cutting a dark figure against the starlit sky. Nazelbert resolves to hold the administrator accountable for his duties, refusing to let him escape his responsibilities. They approach the main residence, a structure that strikes Agnes as surprisingly lavish for such a remote and struggling area. Nazelbert deduces that the previous lord likely indulged in personal luxuries regardless of the territory's state. Agnes gazes up at the imposing building, the realization settling in that this edifice will serve as their new home. Inside, the warm greeting of Kelly, the maid, awaits them. Kelly welcomes them home, explaining that she traveled ahead to inspect and prepare the mansion. She pauses to compliment Agnes, noting that her dress suits her perfectly. Agnes marvels at the speed of Kelly's work, but the maid dismisses the praise as unnecessary. Kelly reports that she has already thoroughly cleaned the essential living spaces, the kitchen, dining room, bathroom, and bedroom. She advises them to restrict their activities to these prepared areas for the night. Agnes thanks Kelly profusely for her loyalty in following them to this frontier. Nazelbert joins in the sentiment, admitting that Kelly's presence brings a significant sense of reassurance to their uncertain situation. He acknowledges that Kelly had the option to remain in the comfort of the royal capital, making her choice to serve them here all the more meaningful. Watching them, Nazelbert silently vows to protect both Agnes and Kelly, resolving to safeguard them no matter where their path leads. Kelly proceeds to guide them to their sleeping quarters, suggesting they retire immediately. Agnes enters the room, aware that it formerly belonged to the lord and lady, which led her to expect a specific arrangement. However, upon seeing the singular large bed dominates the room, reality crashes down on her. The sight triggers a rhythmic pounding in her chest. Nazelbert assesses the room, confirming the lack of a second bed. Agnes nervously questions the propriety of this arrangement, while Nazelbert quickly proposes a solution. He spots a sofa in the adjoining room and volunteers to sleep there, offering Agnes the bed. Nazelbert moves toward the door, insisting that the bed at his parents' home was as hard as a sofa regardless, so he is accustomed to discomfort. Agnes, however, exerts surprising strength, gripping him to prevent his departure. She argues firmly that such an arrangement is unacceptable. She insists that Nazelbert is equally exhausted and deserves proper rest, refusing to let him relegate himself to a sofa. Nazelbert, realizing her determination, concedes to her logic. Agnes tentatively suggests they share the bed if he does not object. Though she voices the proposal, internally she is overwhelmed with nervousness. Nazelbert agrees, sitting on the edge of the mattress. Agnes's mind spins with the magnitude of the situation. She realizes this is her first time alone in a room with a man, and the prospect of sleeping in the same bed sends her thoughts into a chaotic spiral. Nazelbert gently calls her name, interrupting her panic. He reaches out, his hand moving toward her, causing Agnes to freeze in confusion. She questions the action, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Her mind races, unable to process his intent, leaving her in a state of flustered shock as the scene fades. Agnes awakens with a start, her breath catching in her throat as reality floods back in. The memories of the previous night, the flight, the exhaustion, the shared room, hit her with the force of a physical blow, causing her to stammer in disbelief at the situation. She sits up in the vast, empty bed, the silence of the room amplifying her confusion as she scans the space, half expecting to see Nazelbert still there. Her mind replays his final instructions to rest, his concern for her exhaustion lingering in her thoughts. Turning her gaze to the window, she sees the morning light bathing the unfamiliar landscape of Sutrina, the imposing architecture of the estate standing stark against the sky. The morning officially begins with a realization of how deeply she slept, the fatigue of the journey having claimed her completely. Kelly enters the room, her greeting crisp and professional, breaking Agnes's internal reverie. Agnes chides herself for her foolishness, realizing she had been flustered over nothing while Nazelbert had already departed. She deduces that he has already left for the fort to handle official matters, prioritizing his duties over any awkwardness regarding their temporary marital arrangement. Agnes steels herself, deciding that managing the estate is her paramount duty as the Lord's wife, however temporary the title may be. She resolves to match his dedication, setting her first objective, to familiarize herself with every corner of the mansion. Their exploration leads them to a gallery of questionable taste. Agnes stands baffled before a grotesque statue of a pig-like creature wearing a hat and a fountain adorned with abstract, twisting shapes. She questions if these objects truly qualify as art, her skepticism palpable. Kelly suggests selling the unnecessary items to raise funds for hiring help, though Agnes wonders if such bizarre pieces hold any actual value. The state of the mansion becomes the more immediate concern. Dust coats every surface, a testament to neglect. Agnes, undeterred, clenches her fist and declares that they must clean the place regardless of whether they hire staff. When Kelly attempts to take the burden solely upon herself, Agnes insists on learning how to clean, eager to contribute. Agnes explains her motivation. Seeing Nazelbert and the people of Sutrino working so hard compels her to increase her own utility. She refuses to sit idly by, determined to do her best to help. Kelly, moved by her mistress's resolve, bows her head in a moment of emotional acknowledgement, praising Agnes's admirable spirit before accepting her help. The cleaning commences, a montage of scrubbing and dusting that leads them to the rear of the estate. Through a stone archway, Agnes spots an overgrown plot of land and points it out to Kelly. It appears to be a planting field, situated near a structure that Kelly identifies as a stable. Kelly advises Agnes not to push herself too hard, noting the physical toll of the labor. The discovery of the field sparks curiosity about what the previous occupants might have kept there. As the sun dips lower, signaling the approach of evening, Kelly suggests ending the cleaning session to prepare dinner and welcome Nazelbert home. Agnes casually asks if Kelly can cook, which triggers a heavy, considerate silence from the maid. Kelly grimly admits that she has been strictly forbidden from cooking after a past attempt, prompting her to decide on buying ready-made food from the town instead. Agnes, seizing the opportunity to explore, asks to accompany her, eager to see the town for herself. Kelly agrees, handing Agnes a hood to conceal her identity. The excursion to town reveals a harsh reality. The atmosphere is thick with tension. The townspeople cast sharp, unfriendly glances at the pair. Agnes, feeling the weight of the collective gaze, nervously wonders if her potato aura is exploding out of her, making her conspicuous. Kelly dismisses this self-deprecating theory, suggesting the hostility stems from a deeper source. While Agnes laments her unfashionable nature, Kelly theorizes that the malice is directed toward the nobility itself, a lingering resentment from the former lord's bad reputation. She connects this intensity of malice to the Wyvern incident, realizing that the harassment they faced upon arrival was likely intentional. Sensing the danger, Kelly urges a quick completion of their shopping and an immediate return to the mansion. Back in the safety of the estate, Kelly prepares to serve the purchased meal, while Agnes slumps on the table, exhausted by the judgmental stares she endured. The door opens and Nazelbert returns. Agnes immediately perks up, welcoming him home with a bright smile, though Nazelbert's expression remains heavy. He inquires about her well-being, noting the unwelcoming atmosphere he also encountered in town. Nazelbert is consumed by guilt, apologizing for dragging Agnes into such a hostile environment. Agnes rejects his apology, asserting that she is far freer and happier here than she ever was living with her parents. To lighten the mood, she reveals a bottle of wine they found and suggests sharing a glass before dinner. Nazelbert agrees, hoping it will help him unwind. Agnes watches as Nazelbert lifts the glass and drains it in a single, unhesitating gulp. She stares in shock as the alcohol hits him instantly. His face flushes crimson, his eyes glaze over, and he sways unsteadily. He asks for another glass, but Agnes realizes he is already hopelessly drunk. She frantically declares that he has had enough, panic rising as she realizes she poured him far too much. Nazelbert begins to swoon, and Agnes screams, terrified that she might have accidentally killed him with a single glass of wine. Kelly rushes in, observing the scene with a dry remark about him drowning his sorrows, comparing him to her father. Agnes, concerned, probes Nazelbert about his day. In his intoxicated state, Nazelbert becomes candid. He reveals the crushing truth: the town officials and people want nothing from him. Their only instruction was for him to stay quiet, stay in the mansion, and do nothing. Agnes absorbs this information, understanding that the Lord is merely an object of the people's hatred, regardless of Nazelbert's preparations and desire to improve the land. She realizes that without the cooperation of the populace, any attempt to revitalize Sutrina is doomed to fail. Determination replaces her worry. She recalls the seedlings Nazelbert brought with him for breeding, which are still packed in their luggage. She connects this resource with the discovery of the planting field in the mansion's backyard. Agnes proposes a plan of action. They don't need the town's permission to start working the land on their own estate. She urges Nazelbert to plant the seedlings right now, transforming their isolation into an opportunity for growth. The shovel bites into the earth with a crisp, rhythmic sound as Agnes digs into the soil under the cover of darkness. She wipes sweat from her brow, her face flushed with exertion but lit by a bright smile, calculating that at her current velocity, the task will be completed before the night is through. Her maid, holding a hoe and looking concerned, suggests that perhaps they should pause and continue their labors after the sun has risen, citing the lateness of the hour. Agnes, however, is fueled by a newfound enthusiasm after studying an agricultural book she discovered in Nazelbert's mansion library. She recites the knowledge she gleaned, insisting that the fertilizer must be spread immediately following the plowing of the land. The maid warns her that the fertilizer sack is heavy, but Agnes hefts it with a grunt of effort, undeterred by the physical demands. Agnes dismisses the weight, noting internally that the sack is nothing compared to the burden she bore the previous night. A flashback reveals her carrying a heavily intoxicated Nazelbert, who slumped against her in a drunken stupor. Despite his size, Agnes displayed remarkable physical strength, hauling him with a strained expression while he muttered incoherently. Back in the present, water sprinkles from a watering can over the freshly turned earth. Agnes decides to leave the plot as it is for the night, whispering a hopeful prayer that the life they planted will thrive. These are no ordinary plants but improved seedlings that Nazelbert specifically brought to this territory. As she walks away, she reflects on the revelation that Nazelbert has a low tolerance for wine, resolving to monitor his intake in the future to prevent another incident like the one that led to this midnight gardening session. The following morning brings a bright, clear sky as Agnes rushes out to the garden, eager to inspect the fruits of their labor. She hums to herself, expecting little change in such a short span of time, but her optimism shatters instantly upon arrival. The seedling droops mournfully against the dirt, its leaves brown and withered, seemingly lifeless. Agnes drops to her knees, horrified that the plant has died so quickly. She recalls the grim rumors surrounding the Sutrina territory, that it is a cursed land where crops refuse to take root. This baffles her, as the wild flowers and decorative plants in the yard flourish without issue, yet food-producing crops seem specifically targeted by the land's hostility. Guilt crashes over her as she stares at the dying plant. She feels she has betrayed Nazelbert, who is already overwhelmed and depressed by his workload. Adding this agricultural failure to his burden seems cruel. Tears prick the corners of her eyes as she frantically searches for a solution, refusing to let it end like this. She knows that standard, material enhancement magic is ineffective on living biological entities like plants, but desperation drives her to try a different approach. She clasps her hands together in fervent prayer, channeling her mana and will into the soil, begging the plant to grow for Nazelbert's sake. She pours her spirit into the plea, repeating her wish for the plant to survive. The narrative shifts to the interior of the mansion, where domestic duties call. Kelly discusses the need to sort through the household goods, though Agnes expresses concern about the logistics of the frontier. Agnes worries that there are no traders in this remote region who would be interested in purchasing their surplus items. Kelly, maintaining her professional composure, assures Agnes that she will find a willing buyer. Agnes gazes at Kelly with admiration, noting that the maid seems capable of handling absolutely anything, whereas Agnes herself lacks domestic skills, admitting she is particularly terrible at cooking. Kelly gently refutes this self-deprecation and promises to make all the necessary arrangements so Agnes can relax. Agnes clutches her chest, her internal monologue revealing the depth of her motivation. She desperately wants to be of service to Nazelbert because she feels an immense debt of gratitude toward him. He brought her here, saving her from a miserable fate, and even though he could have easily found a reason to dissolve their marriage and escape, He chose to protect her when she had nowhere else to go. This kindness drives her resolve to be more than just a burden. Determined to contribute, Agnes announces that she is going shopping in the town of Edilea within the Sutrina territory. Kelly is surprised, but Agnes insists, stating she has a specific plan in mind, though she warns she might cause a bit of trouble. Kelly, resigned but supportive, accepts Agnes's decision. Upon arriving in the town of Edilea, Agnes and Kelly, dressed modestly to blend in, are accosted by a local woman who recognizes them. The woman identifies them as the maids serving the new lord, to which Agnes nervously agrees, maintaining her disguise. Agnes surveys the market stalls and is struck by the poverty of the selection. The crates contain only foraged mushrooms and nuts. Her suspicion is confirmed. There are absolutely no grains or vegetables available for sale, a stark indicator of the region's agricultural failure. The townswoman leans in, mentioning she heard rustling noises coming from the lord's estate the previous night. Agnes flinches, fearing their secret farming has been discovered, but the woman is more interested in gossiping about the new lord. The woman's expression hardens as she speaks of the previous lord, revealing the deep-seated trauma of the town. She explains that the lords who have ruled this land for generations have never provided a stable salary to the workers. The previous lord was particularly heinous, ordering the townsfolk to build his fancy mansion for free while he kidnapped pretty girls to serve his debauched whims. The history of corruption runs deep. The woman recounts how the former lord kept a dangerous monster on the grounds and embezzled tax money meant for maintaining roads and building orphanages. Instead of public works, the money funded his personal greed, paying for the furniture and ornaments that now sit inside the mansion Agnes inhabits. He was a violent tyrant who treated the populace like livestock. The woman finishes her tale with a grim satisfaction, stating that everyone in the town was happy when they heard the news that the lord was attacked by his own monster. Agnes listens to this litany of abuse with a heavy heart, realizing why the townspeople look at them with such distrust. The title of lord is synonymous with suffering here. She realizes that mere words will not suffice. She cannot simply scream that Nazelbert is different. To change their minds, they must earn the people's trust through actions, attitudes, and tangible results. Suddenly, the heavy atmosphere is broken by Nazelbert, who comes sprinting toward them, his face pale and covered in sweat. He spots Agnes and cries out her name, breathless with panic. He stammers that something is terribly wrong with the seedlings they planted in the garden. Agnes brings her hands to her face in horror, assuming the worst, that her prayers failed and the plants have withered completely. She laments that Nazelbert had to be the one to discover the failure. Nazelbert, too agitated to explain, grabs Agnes by the wrist and drags her back toward the estate. Agnes stumbles after him, confused and dreading the sight that awaits her. They arrive at the garden, but the patch of dirt is no longer empty. Looming over them is a colossal tree, its massive trunk twisting upward into a canopy of thick branches, having grown instantaneously from the single seedling. Leaves drift down around them as they stand in the shadow of this botanical impossible. Agnes stares up, her jaw dropping and eyes wide with absolute shock, screaming out in confusion at the monstrosity she has inadvertently summoned. Staring in bewilderment at the botanical anomaly before him, Nazelbert grappled with the reality that the viola berry, a plant that typically yielded fruit no larger than a thumb, had undergone a monstrous transformation. The specimen towering over him defied all natural laws, its branches heavy with glowing, oversized produce that pulsed with an ethereal energy. Beside him, Agnes clutched the fabric of her skirt, her body trembling with a mixture of guilt and apprehension as Nazelbert turned his gaze toward her, questioning if she possessed any knowledge regarding this sudden mutation. Her stammered response and the way she shrank away from his inquiry confirmed his suspicions before she even confessed, her admission of fault hanging heavily in the magical air. Nazelbert analyzed the situation, his mind racing through the variables of his horticultural experiments. He realized that while he had improved the viola berry breed, he had never utilized the seeds in this specific manner, nor had he anticipated such an explosive reaction. He deduced that the catalyst was not the seed itself but the external influence of Agnes's magic, a realization that shifted his expression from confusion to intrigued calculation. Rather than reprimanding her, he requested her assistance, proposing an immediate experiment on the remaining seedlings to verify his hypothesis. As they worked, a montage of rapid cultivation unfolded. Under the influence of Agnes's material enchantment, the saplings surged upward, bypassing months of natural growth to reach maturity in a mere half-day. Nazelbert knelt before the thriving grove, confirming that the impossible growth rate was indeed a consistent byproduct of his wife's enchantment, a discovery that sparked a glimmer of hope for the beleaguered territory of Sutrina. Armed with this agricultural breakthrough, Nazelbert stood before the gathered officials at Sutrina Fort the following day, a basket of the harvested viola berries presented as evidence of his claims. He addressed the uniformed men with a serious demeanor, explaining that these fruits were harvested from the barren land just the previous day. He outlined his vision, positing that by combining his improved seedlings with his wife's enhancement magic, they could circumvent the region's poor soil conditions and avert the looming crop failure. However, the reception was frigid. The officials exchanged skeptical glances, their murmurs of viola berry dripping with disdain. Instead of awe, Nazelbert received hostility. One officer openly scoffed, declaring that they could never trust a criminal like him, rejecting the proposal outright without even inspecting the produce. The rejection escalated into an interrogation, with the soldiers accusing Nazelbert of suspicious activities, citing the sudden appearance of the massive tree near his residence as proof of his dubious intentions. They questioned if the magic-infused fruit was poisoned or if he intended to exploit the famine by selling the crops at extortionate prices. Nazelbert attempted to defend his integrity, insisting that his sole motivation was the welfare of Sutrina's people, but his words fell on deaf ears. Silhouetted against the harsh light of the fort, the officials turned their backs on him, dismissing his efforts as a waste of time and warning him to cease his activities. Left alone in the corridor, Nazelbert crushed a berry in his hand, the juice staining his skin like fresh blood as he trembled with suppressed frustration and the crushing weight of his inability to break through their prejudice. Back in the solitude of the mansion's hallway, Nazelbert leaned against the stone wall, the silence of the house amplifying his internal turmoil. He reflected on the repeated dismissal of his reform proposals, the sting of failure particularly sharp given the urgency of the situation. He understood that without a stable supply of fruits and vegetables, the nutritional deficiency would soon lead to a widespread epidemic among the populace. His brooding was interrupted by the heavy sound of a body collapsing nearby. Startled, he looked up to find Henry, the bespectacled aide, leaning heavily against the wall, gasping for air as if he had sprinted the entire distance from the fort. Agnes rushed to Henry's side, alarmed by his ragged breathing, but before Henry could articulate his urgent message, Nazelbert silenced him, refusing to hear a report from a man on the verge of collapse. The scene shifted to the mansion's entryway, where Kelly the maid opened the door to greet her master, only to freeze in shock. Nazelbert walked through the threshold carrying the exhausted Henry in a bridal carry, a sight that elicited a comical screech of disbelief from the typically composed aide. Agnes followed close behind, her expression a mix of concern and amusement, while Nazelbert calmly instructed Kelly to prepare a room so Henry could recover. Moments later, in the guest room, Henry awoke to find himself tucked into bed, the memory of his sprint and the subsequent humiliation flooding back as he pushed his glasses up his nose. Recovered but still pale, a condition he dryly noted was his natural state, Henry sat up to address Nazelbert and Agnes. He confessed to eavesdropping on the disastrous meeting at the fort, his expression turning serious as he analyzed the officials' hostility. He explained that the soldiers' distrust was not entirely personal to Nazelbert but a deep-seated trauma resulting from the tyrannical policies of the previous lords. The officials, he noted, were conditioned to view any authority figure with suspicion, making it nearly impossible for a new, exiled lord to gain their ear. Agnes interjected with passionate optimism, clutching her hands to her chest as she declared that Nazelbert's genuine desire to improve Sutrina would eventually reach them, reminding him that he had never once stopped thinking about the people's well-being since their arrival. Buoyed by Agnes's unwavering support, Henry offered his own proposition. He noted that as a representative who merely acted on behalf of the Lord, he had avoided the brunt of the populace's hatred and even maintained a level of trust with some subordinates. He offered himself as a bridge, a mediator who could carry Nazelbert's message to the people without triggering their automatic defense mechanisms. Henry revealed that he had watched Nazelbert working tirelessly at the fort and, seeing the miraculous fruits created with Agnes, he had finally become convinced of Nazelbert's dedication to the region's future. With a resolute gaze, Henry declared that the combination of Nazelbert's vision and Agnes's power would lead Sutrina to salvation, though he admitted he could not achieve this task alone. Nazelbert accepted the alliance, his determination renewed by Henry's strategic offer. He immediately shifted gears to practical planning, outlining the need to first prove the safety of the magically enhanced crops to quell rumors of poison. He discussed the prioritization of vegetables and hinted at another type of seedling he had in reserve. In the background, Agnes pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed with emotion. When Kelly leaned in to check on her mistress, Agnes revealed through her tears that she was weeping from sheer relief, overjoyed that Nazelbert finally had an ally who understood his true intentions and shared his burden. As the strategy session concluded, Nazelbert and Agnes stood together in the soft light of the room. Nazelbert acknowledged that Henry's intervention had given him a newfound hope, a sentiment that made Agnes beam with happiness. Unable to contain his gratitude, Nazelbert pulled Agnes into a tight embrace, burying his face in her shoulder. He confessed that without her presence, he would have been suffering in isolation, crushed by the weight of leadership and rejection. He thanked her for protecting the seedlings and for simply being there, crediting her support as the sole reason he could continue to endure the hardships of their exile. Agnes, her eyes shimmering with affection, smiled back radiantly, countering that she was the one who should be thankful for being brought along on this journey, the couple finding strength in their shared resolve to heal the broken land of Sutrina. The imposing stone walls of the Sutrina fortress, where the morning sun cast long shadows over the gathered soldiers. Henry stood before the skeptical platoon, acting as the voice for the new lord, meticulously relaying Nazelbert's vision for the region's agricultural future. Although confusion initially clouded the soldiers' faces, the persistence of Henry's diplomacy began to erode their resistance. A few days after Henry first volunteered his services, he successfully brokered a tentative alliance, convincing the garrison to lend their physical strength to the Lord's cause. In the barren fields outside the fort, Nazelbert and Henry stood with a crate of seedlings, watching as the soldiers took up farming tools instead of weapons. One officer directed his men to focus their efforts on plowing a specific corner of the land for the day's experiment. Seizing the moment, Nazelbert turned to his wife, requesting her to apply her material enchantment magic to the newly planted crop. Agnes responded with a radiant determination, declaring that he should leave the task to her. Agnes extended her hands over the small sprout, channeling her energy until the plant surged upward in a burst of magical light. The soldiers watched in stunned silence as the saplings defied nature, expanding rapidly into full-grown trees heavy with fruit in mere moments. A collective gasp of, "Oh, oh, oh," swept through the ranks as the grove materialized before their eyes. Nazelbert knelt by one of the lush bushes, inspecting the produce with a critical eye, while the soldiers whispered their doubts, questioning if something grown so unnaturally could truly be edible on such desolate land. One brave soldier plucked a berry and placed it in his mouth, his expression shifting from suspicion to shock. Nearby, Henry sampled the fruit as well, chewing thoughtfully before a satisfied smile broke across his face. He confirmed the quality, announcing that it was delicious, just as they had anticipated. Encouraged by Henry's reaction, a younger soldier named Connie took a bite, his eyes widening in disbelief at the flavor. Henry analyzed the taste profile, noting that it possessed a richer flavor and a more elegant sweetness than the standard viola berry he was accustomed to. Nazelbert observed the reaction with intense focus, holding a berry up to his own eye to scrutinize its perfection. The skepticism among the troops evaporated, replaced by the enthusiastic sounds of chewing and exclamations of delight as they realized the truth of the Lord's promise. Later, in the solitude of his stone-walled office, Nazelbert sat at his desk, reviewing documents, when a rhythmic knocking interrupted his work. He granted permission to enter, and the door opened to reveal the soldier who had previously treated him with open hostility. The man stood stiffly, offering a formal apology for his rude words during their first encounter. He confessed his regret, acknowledging that while the people of Sutrina had suffered greatly under the tyranny of past lords, he now realized that Nazelbert was different. The soldier humbled himself, admitting that the territory was in dire need of Nazelbert's assistance. He pledged his support, asking the Lord to help not just the garrison, but the people of Sutrina, and firmly stated that he, too, needed Nazelbert's guidance. Nazelbert accepted the apology with a quiet grace, assuring the man that all was forgiven. The scene shifted to the bustling activity of a street market, where a mysterious hooded figure paused to inspect a crate of carrots. The shopkeeper, a sturdy woman with an apron, greeted the stranger, asking if they wished to make a purchase. She struck up a conversation, mentioning the rumors that the new lord's wife was using magic to vitalize the crops. The woman gestured to her wares, admitting that thanks to Agnes's magic, the market was finally stocked with items they had been forced to give up in the past. The shopkeeper continued to gossip, noting that the people at the fort and the new lord had been working tirelessly. She confessed that she had assumed the new lord would be as corrupt as his predecessors, but seeing the results, she mused that perhaps it was time to trust him a little more. The hooded figure listened silently, a small smile gracing their lips beneath the cowl before replying, "I see." At the grand entrance of the mansion, the maid announced to Agnes that a trader had arrived to see her. The visitor threw open the doors with a flourish, radiating an almost blinding aura of sparkle and charisma that forced Agnes to shield her eyes. The trader introduced himself as Bell, declaring his profession with theatrical enthusiasm. He bowed, expressing his anticipation to work with them. Agnes and her maids watched with trepidation as Bell began his evaluation. The maids whispered among themselves that he seemed like a strange, fishy character rather than a legitimate merchant. Bell, possessing sharp ears, spun around and vehemently denied being suspicious, insisting they could believe in him. He proceeded to inspect the household goods Agnes intended to sell. Bell picked up a piece of fabric, noting that while he had heard of Agnes's magical contributions to the land's food supply, he had to be objective about the goods. He critiqued the items bluntly, stating that the designs were in poor taste, though he conceded that the material quality was excellent. Agnes accepted the criticism with a nervous hum. Bell's demeanor softened as he mentioned the rumors circulating in the street market, positive rumors about the changes in Citrina. Agnes tried to deflect the praise, insisting she hadn't done much, but Bell countered that the success was due to the collaboration between Nazelbert, the officials, and herself. He handed over a bag of gold coins, the purchase price for the goods, and bid them farewell, promising to meet again. Time passed in a montage of progress. The fields turned green, and the relationship between the lord and the people thawed, with the locals slowly accepting Nazelbert and his retinue. Nazelbert continued his relentless work to solve Citrina's problems, often seen in the fields consulting with his team. Agnes, meanwhile, utilized the funds from the sale of the household goods to conduct interviews for new staff. With Henry's assistance in vetting candidates, they received numerous applications. Agnes proudly introduced her new hires, 3 maids named Lolly, Misa, and Marilyn, and a cook named Maka. She planned to gradually expand the staff as the current team settled into their roles, feeling a sense of peace as her life in Citrina began to stabilize. She felt she was finally doing the best she could in her current circumstances. However, the tranquility was shattered when Nazelbert sat in the drawing room, his face pale as he held a letter that had just arrived from the capital. Agnes, sensing the tension, asked if it was from the royal family. Nazelbert confirmed it, his expression grave as he pressed a hand to his chin in deep thought. Agnes nervously asked what was written inside. Nazelbert turned to his wife, stating that he needed to inform her because the contents concerned her directly. He revealed that they had received an invitation to a garden party hosted by the second prince, His Highness Prince Leonardo. The event was not in the capital, but at the residence of a nobleman the prince knew, and the invitation explicitly required them to attend as a couple. As Agnes processed this shock, Nazelbert delivered the final, crushing blow. He suspected that the Eventail family, Agnes's abusive relatives, would also be in attendance. Agnes froze, her eyes widening in horror as she stammered, "What did you say?" The frontier executive officer, who approached his home shortly before Nazelbert's arrival, the weight of another hard day's work pressing upon his shoulders. Yet, as he crossed the threshold, he internally noted that his exhaustion simply evaporated the moment he entered his sanctuary. He announced his return, only to be immediately intercepted by a blur of fur. His dog, Harry, launched into the air, pinning him down with an enthusiastic greeting of barks and licks that Henry futilely attempted to fend off. Escaping the canine assault, Henry faced a second wave of affection as his children, Shelley and Riley, rushed forward to welcome their father. They eagerly reported on their day, boasting that they had studied nation studies with their mother. Above the clamor of the children, his wife, Holly, appeared with a gentle smile, praising him for his hard work. Overwhelmed by the warmth, Henry buried his face in her shoulder, silently charging his spirit while the children watched and giggled at their parents' flirting. Holly comforted him with a soft laugh, allowing the embrace, as the scene affirmed that Henry would continue to work hard the next day solely to protect the family he loved. Meanwhile, the household staff expanded, with Agnes introducing the new recruits to the rest of the team. Maka, hailing from the foot of the mountain, brought with her an amazing knowledge of medicinal herbs. Lolly joined the ranks as a reliable hand, possessing valuable experience working as a maid and raising children. Marilyn, a former bar worker with a small child, was welcomed as a live-in maid. Finally, Misa arrived from a local restaurant in Citrina, filling the critical void of a cook which the household had desperately lacked. The narrative then detailed the specific magical abilities of the Lord's inner circle. Nasilbert possessed plant manipulation, a power allowing him to improve seedlings, manipulate flora intentionally, and even create plants where none existed. Kelly wielded mind reading, enabling her to perceive the general emotions directed toward her, a skill that allowed her to work without hesitation or expression. Connie utilized swiftness, granting him bursts of fast movement perfect for messaging, though his limited magic power prevented prolonged use. In a quiet moment between duties, Agnes expressed surprise upon learning that Kelly possessed gardening skills honed at her parents' house. Kelly revealed that she grew up in a large family composed entirely of men, where she served as the eldest daughter to a legion of younger brothers. This history of caretaking explained her proficiency with manual labor and her demeanor. She confessed to Agnes that because of her background, she couldn't help but genuinely enjoy the task of taking care of her mistress. The atmosphere in the drawing room thickened, heavy with the implications of the cream-colored stationery resting in Nasilbert's hands. He announced the potential presence of the Eventail family at the upcoming garden party, his voice dropping to a grave timbre that vibrated with concern. Agnes froze, her breath hitching as the realization washed over her. The very people who had tormented her past might intrude upon her present sanctuary. She calculated the social geometry of such an encounter, visualizing the inevitable awkwardness and friction that would arise if their paths crossed amidst the nobility. Nasilbert shifted the focus to the host, questioning the motives of the second prince, Prince Leonardo. He paced his thoughts, debating whether this invitation signaled a recruitment for the succession battle or concealed a more sinister intention. He postulated that the prince might intend to make an example of them, parading the exiled lord who had dared to disrespect a princess. His gaze drifted to the floor, burdened by the knowledge that even if the prince's intent remained benign, the noble guests would not be so forgiving. He predicted the whispers and the scorn, knowing he would fall victim to the gossip mill the moment he stepped into the public eye. Agnes watched him, recognizing the shadow that passed over his features, the loneliness of helplessness. She knew that pain intimately. The sensation of being pierced by curious eyes and sharp words was a scar she carried from her own history. Yet, she remembered how Nasilbert had once reached out to her, relieving her of her worries when she had no one else. Determination hardened her expression. She declared that she would accompany him, refusing to let him endure the ordeal in isolation. Nasilbert attempted to dissuade her, warning that she might encounter those she wished to avoid, specifically her parents. Agnes countered his hesitation with a stoic resolve, reasoning that since they had disowned her, she owed them no familial deference. She confessed that her only desire was to share his burden, a sentiment that softened Nasilbert's worry into gratitude. He thanked her, and they solidified their pact to face the battlefield of high society together. In the hallway, Kelly overheard the resolution and erupted into a blaze of professional enthusiasm. She framed the party not as a social gathering but as a strategic combat zone, a rare opportunity to reveal Agnes's true transformation to the world. Flames of motivation practically danced around the maid as she declared that she would ensure Agnes was perfectly prepared, leaving Agnes and Nasilbert startled by her intensity. Days later, the carriage rattled toward the venue, carrying a nervous Agnes and a stoic Nasilbert. Inside, Agnes adjusted her dress, the fabric comfortable against her skin, though her stomach churned with anticipation. She noted that she felt as though she were wearing Kelly's fiery enthusiasm itself. As the destination neared, Agnes recognized the estate of Earl Luger, a location that dredged up bitter memories. She recalled a past humiliation within those very walls, where she had attended a party to request an engagement only to be scorned. Nasilbert, sensing her distress, offered her an escape, suggesting she could wait in the safety of the carriage. Agnes declined, steeling herself to proceed. The couple stepped out into the garden party, immediately drawing the attention of the crowd. Whispers rippled through the gathered nobility like a wind through dry leaves. Guests murmured about the audacity of the exiled lord showing his face after his punishment. They pointed and stared, identifying Nasilbert with disdain. The scrutiny quickly shifted to the woman on his arm. The guests failed to recognize the radiant figure beside him, speculating maliciously that she must be a mistress, as they recalled rumors of his marriage to an unfashionable lady. Ignoring the venomous whispers, Nasilbert navigated the crowd until they encountered a nobleman named Yurata. Yurata welcomed them with superficial politeness, congratulating Nasilbert on his marriage while casting a confused glance at Agnes. He clearly did not recognize the elegant woman standing before him, his mind unable to reconcile this beauty with the unfashionable image he held in his memory. Agnes fidgeted slightly, debating whether to correct him. She decided to bridge the gap, stepping forward to introduce herself. "It's me, Agnes," she stated, clarifying her identity as the former daughter of the Eventail family. She touched her cheek, mentioning her makeup as a way to explain the change. Yurata stared, his brain stalling as he processed the information. Slowly, the realization dawned. His eyes widened to comical proportions, and he let out a strangled noise of pure shock. Beside him, his companion, presumably the woman he had married instead, reacted with equal violence, a glass crashing to the ground in the background as the reality shattered their preconceptions. Yurata stammered, unable to comprehend that this poised beauty was the same woman he had once known, his internal monologue screaming about the impossibility of such a transformation. Agnes maintained her composure, offering a polite congratulation on Yurata's marriage before signaling to Nazelbert that they should depart. They walked away, leaving the stunned nobleman gaping in their wake. Nazelbert leaned in, asking if Yurata had said anything to upset her, but Agnes brushed it off with a smile, asserting that she intended to enjoy the party. As they put distance between themselves and the encounter, the weight of the public attention pressed in on them. Nazelbert hung his head, clearly affected by the atmosphere, prompting Agnes to prod him gently. He admitted that he had anticipated the hostility but still found it draining. However, he turned to Agnes, his expression softening as he confessed that her presence anchored him, making him feel reassured amidst the storm of judgment. Agnes flushed, stammering that she should be the one thanking him. To break the heavy mood, Agnes pointed excitedly toward a table laden with desserts, her eyes sparkling. She suggested they indulge, and Nazelbert agreed, asking if she liked sweets. Her enthusiastic "yes" drew a chuckle from him, but their moment of levity was sliced short by a piercing voice. "Sister Agnes," a voice called out, dripping with recognition. Agnes froze, the blood draining from her face as she turned to face the source. Standing there was her brother, Lord Paul, flanked by her parents, the formidable Lord and Lady Eventail. The whispers of "shameless woman" circulated in the air as the family that had cast her out now stood before her, setting the stage for an inevitable and dreadful confrontation. Agnes stands frozen before the grotesque visages of her parents, who loom over her with expressions of utter disdain. Her mother, face twisted in a snarl, accuses her of drawing shameful attention in public, while her father, the Marquis Eventail, bellows that she is a disgrace to their noble house despite having already been disowned. The Marquis, veins bulging on his forehead, ruthlessly critiques Agnes's appearance, mocking her dress as superficial and cheap, and labeling her makeup messy, claiming her very presence mocks the hard work of the maids. Agnes attempts to speak, stammering a denial, but her voice is drowned out by the relentless verbal assault. Just as the emotional weight threatens to crush her, a gloved hand firmly grasps Agnes's trembling fist, anchoring her to reality. Nazelbert steps into the fray, his presence commanding and calm, immediately complimenting Agnes by stating that light colors suit her far better than the gaudy attire her parents prefer. The Marquis recoils, startled by the intrusion, and demands to know why this stranger looks at him with such intensity. He attempts to assert his dominance, questioning how anyone dares speak to a father in such a manner, but Nazelbert cuts him down with a cold command to retract his vile words. The tension in the air snaps as Nazelbert positions himself between Agnes and her abusers, declaring himself her guardian. He icily warns the Marquis to keep his hands off his wife, a declaration that stuns the older man. The Marquis, sputtering, tries to dismiss Nazelbert's interference as an intrusion into private family affairs, but Nazelbert is unrelenting. He leans in, his gaze piercing, and challenges the Marquis's definition of guardianship, reminding him of how they abandoned Agnes alone in the cold, dark nights of the city. When the Marquis attempts to justify his cruelty by labeling Agnes a defective product, Nazelbert silences him instantly, branding the nobleman a criminal for his treatment of her. Nazelbert systematically dismantles the Marquis's defense of discipline, revealing the horrific physical toll the family exacted upon Agnes. He exposes that Agnes bore large bruises on her cheek when he first took her into his care, a revelation that causes ripples of shock among the gathering crowd. He continues his indictment, detailing how her health was jeopardized by being forced to wear hazardous corsets from a young age and shoes that did not fit, leaving her feet torn to shreds. The Marquis frantically tries to argue that respectable attire takes precedence over health, shouting that appearance is of utmost importance, but his callous priorities only serve to turn the onlookers against him. The surrounding guests murmur in horror, whispering about the cruelty of the Eventail family and the physical abuse Agnes endured. They question the family's motives, casting judgment upon the parents who would beat their daughter to the point of bruising. Amidst the growing hostility, a dark-haired man in a cape observes the scene with boredom, dismissing the conversation as pointless, while the Marquis snaps at the crowd to mind their own business. The atmosphere shifts abruptly with the arrival of Prince Leonardo, whose presence commands immediate attention. The Marquis, seeing an opportunity to salvage his reputation, throws himself before the prince, playing the victim and claiming that a criminal has humiliated him. He points an accusatory finger at Nazelbert, expecting royal support. However, Prince Leonardo smiles benevolently, identifying Nazelbert as one of his dear guests, a statement that leaves the Marquis dumbfounded. When the Marquis tries to protest, claiming Nazelbert dishonored the royal princess, Leonardo dismisses the objection, hinting that the truth is already known to many present. Prince Leonardo addresses the gathering, publicly declaring Nazelbert's innocence. He pivots the conversation to the true source of the kingdom's turmoil, his sister Mia and her husband, Robin. Leonardo candidly criticizes Robin's lack of competence and self-awareness, noting that he hits on any woman he fancies, which places their fiancés in difficult predicaments. He explains that with the castle occupied by the queen and his brother unwell, he has taken it upon himself to prepare for a national emergency. Leonardo reveals his resolve to save the country from crumbling, stating that if the situation demands it, he is prepared to replace Princess Mia in the line of succession. Turning his attention back to the immediate matters, Leonardo requests Nazelbert, acknowledged as the Lord of Sutrina, to join him in the guest room later for a private discussion. Nazelbert accepts the summons quietly. The prince then turns his gaze to the Marquis Eventail, delivering a swift judgment. The Marquis is banned from public gatherings for the time being. The Marquis is flabbergasted, protesting his loyalty to the crown and questioning why he is being punished after causing a scene at a royal party. Prince Leonardo's expression hardens as he reveals the true reason for the ban. He exposes that the Marquis had forgotten Nazelbert's status as a lord and had intended to attack him with a concealed object. The guards seize the Marquis, who struggles and shouts insults, still failing to grasp the gravity of his attempted crime. Leonardo looks on with pity, noting that the Marquis still does not understand his error, as the guards drag the screaming parents away. Agnes's mother begs for reconsideration, while her father continues to shriek, their dignity completely shattered as they are removed from the venue. Later, in the quiet confinement of a guest room, Agnes bows deeply, her face buried in her hands as she apologizes profusely to Prince Leonardo for her father's immense disrespect. Leonardo, sipping tea with a relaxed demeanor, dismisses her apology, stating that he never expected the Marquis to go to such lengths and that the man simply got what he deserved. He offers his own apology for being rough with her family, assuring Agnes that he does not blame her for their actions. Agnes, touched by his benevolence, thinks to herself how kind the prince is. Nazelbert, sitting beside Agnes, cuts through the pleasantries and asks the prince to speak frankly about his intentions. Leonardo drops his carefree facade, admitting that he can no longer stand to watch his sister's recklessness and asks Nazelbert to join forces with him. Nazelbert remains skeptical, noting that Leonardo has historically been apathetic toward palace affairs and indifferent to others, making his sudden passion suspicious. He deduces that there must be someone else pulling the strings behind the prince. Leonardo chuckles, impressed by Nazelbert's intuition, and confirms that he is indeed taking orders from someone else. However, Nazelbert firmly draws a line, refusing to accept any offer that would require him to abandon his duties as the Lord of Sutrina. Leonardo acknowledges this constraint but insists that he needs Nazelbert's help to protect the Desnim nation from threats. He reveals that his sister and her faction plan to recall Nazelbert to the palace to impose political duties upon him, effectively stripping him of his autonomy. Nazelbert realizes the gravity of the situation as Leonardo explains that their goal is to stop Mia's faction from doing as they please. The prince mentions that the mysterious person behind him predicted Nazelbert would revert to his old self if forced back, a notion Leonardo claims not to care about personally. The discussion turns to the annulment of the engagement with Nazelbert, which the opposition intends to pretend never happened, a regression Leonardo and his backer are determined to prevent. Nazelbert agrees that they cannot let things get worse. As the sun sets, casting long shadows over the landscape, Nazelbert and Agnes travel back to Sutrina in a carriage. Nazelbert gazes out the window, expressing a weary desire to simply live peacefully in his territory, though he acknowledges that they are once again caught up in palace affairs. He turns to Agnes, his expression softening, and admits that from the first time he met her, he was wary of the Eventail family. However, he confesses that he never anticipated the intensity of their contempt or the cruelty with which they treated her. Nazelbert's voice fills with suppressed emotion as he tells Agnes that seeing their treatment of her made him deeply angry. He looks at her with profound empathy, acknowledging how hard she must have worked all by herself, with no one to confide in. Agnes listens, stunned, as he validates the years of suffering she endured in silence. Memories flood Agnes's mind. Times she gave up thinking it was futile, moments she was hurt by callous words, and the years she spent obeying her parents while desperately searching for something she could do. She realizes that for her entire life, she has been waiting for someone to say these exact words to her. Overwhelmed, tears stream down her face, and she leans into Nazelbert, apologizing for dirtying his clothes with her crying. Nazelbert holds her close, dismissing her concern about his attire, and makes a solemn vow to always protect her.